Oh, we're on right now. Okay, so thanks for joining us for episode 10 of Life on Life's Terms. We have a guy here named Ken. He has quite an interesting story, and we're going to let him get into it. And it's a pleasure to have him here. And he's a very select few who actually beat the statistical odds. And so the mighty and powerful Ken, how are you today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank
That's
you very
great.
much for having me, Justin.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. So let's dive right into it. What was childhood like?
Okay, so I grew up in a household where my parents were separated. On one side of the factor, like my mom and my stepdad were good, legitimate, hardworking folks. They had their issues, personal, like disciplinary mental health issues for my mother, which she worked through over the years, but she provided for us financially very well, including my stepdad. But on the other side of the fence, like my father, who was still an active role in my life, was involved in a criminal organization, and that weighed heavily on me, especially like growing up into my teenage years, where I seen my mom and my stepdad, like financially struggle here and there with bills. Things were tight. There was stress in the household. But then I always see my dad on the weekends, and he always had a fat wad of cash and new cars, and he was out partying, and there was, like strippers and other gangsters around and stuff. And, as a young kid growing up, seeing this, I looked at it like, everybody's got it all wrong. The working man's a sucker.
Yeah.
Like, what are these guys doing? Slaving away, paying taxes when there's other ways to live your life that's more fun.
Yeah.
So, that started to weigh heavily on me and affected all my decisions since I was 10 years old until I was 28.
Yeah. I can definitely identify with that. My childhood was very much the same. I used to tell people, or I still tell them today, it was like the movie Goodfellas, except our Cadillacs were newer, right? and so because of that, I mean, I had a really difficult time thinking about work as well. I did have a really positive male influence though when I was 10 years old, who seemed to show me how to be a normal guy, and I was okay with that, like he took me in the bush. He was a geologist, so he took me in the bush and he showed me that way of living up in Northern Ontario. But then I would go back to Montreal and see my uncles, and by seeing my uncles all in the same category with these people that they were talking about on the news, as well as the people that were being spoken about in the tabloid magazines in Montreal, I was all about it. And then the bombs went off. And those were consistently happening every week, all the time when I was growing up. And to see the orders go out and then see the shit that happened on the news, it's like the ladies telling us not to go out of my door at 9 o'clock at night because these motherfuckers have it locked down, right? Why am I calling the cops? That ain't happening, right? And so that definitely changed my view on calling the cops or doing any of that, doing anything that normal people did. You didn't do that in my ghetto, and you sure as hell weren't doing that up in Northern Ontario in the town that I was in. So that made me believe the system was bullshit. And then seeing the police take systematic payoffs blew my mind. Like, there was no way I was ever like, a fine? Well, I'll just pay you now. Like, that's what I thought. I did not realize that you had to go to the courthouse to pay fines off. I thought cops could just take the payment for the fine right there. Like, who knew you had to go to court for that, right? I had no idea. And so it's a huge developmental stumbling block when you grow up in a lifestyle or a household like that, right? It's not really a choice. I would say for myself, I didn't know what being a man was about being around those guys. Like, all I ever saw was punch them. When in doubt, knock them out, right? That was the philosophy that I grew up with my entire life. And so because that was my philosophy, I didn't give a fuck what you thought about. I didn't give a fuck how you felt or how you cared or any of that shit. I just couldn't figure you out. So I would take you out. You know, that's the philosophy that was ingrained. And because of that, it was always fight or flight. And I was always on the precipice of fear my entire life because of that. Would you be able to adopt that in your life as well? Like, was that kind of a part of your formation later on in teen years?
Oh, like even before that, like I remember the big turning point for me where I actually knew that I was different from everybody else. It was in grade 2. And like I remember this vividly. The teacher was going around and asking kids to stand up and ask them like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And these kids were like, you know, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a cop, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a veterinarian. And I stood up and like the only thing that I knew, and like, you know, my favorite movie was Casino when I first I stood up, I said, I want to be a gangster. And the teacher looked at me and she says, get out of my classroom, go sit in the hallway. And I said, why? She goes, you're going to be no good, just like your father. Because just recently that year, my dad was in the newspapers on certain charges. So like everybody, all the teachers knew about like my life situation or judged me for what they read in the papers. And then like the labeling started happening. And I realized that, you know, I was an outcast because I did have different parents. And, you know, when I was playing soccer and the other kids' parents were there, I remember once in a blue moon when I was lucky enough that my dad would show up, he would ride his bike out to the middle of the field, and it would be like very blatant that we were a different household. And there was no shame there. And it was he taught me it was something to be proud of. And so I was like, I thought that was like my identity. Like I grew up thinking that was my destiny. I was there to follow his footsteps. I had to live a certain way, act a certain way, and not give a fuck like he didn't. And over the years, that apathetic attitude got worse and worse, and the consequences got worse and worse.
I think one of the differences in my family, we were told not to do that, not to be brazen, not to be brash. And the reason why we were told to do that is because if nobody knows you're coming, nobody knows you're coming, right? So that was always, like my family was always about shut your mouth. Don't you ever let anybody know what you're thinking unless it's one of us, you know? And so we weren't allowed to be brazen about it. Everybody knew, like all my friends knew, but we did not talk about it. And even around my friends, like my first group of friends kicked the living shit out of me to make sure that I could take a beating so that I could give a beating, right? So even though my family was my family, it didn't matter. That line was to my family. You were not accepted into that. You had to prove that you had that at a young kid. And if you took one, you didn't tell anybody, because that's not the way how this thing works. This thing works because you dealt with it the way that you dealt with it. It's on your back. You don't have what we have yet, you know? And so it was always like that growing up. It was always trying to get that. Like my uncle used to say, everybody sits at a table, but how much did you bring to the fucking table? You know? And are you going to tell people how you brought it to the table? Because if you tell them how, they're going to come and get it from you. Right? And so it was always that attitude growing up. And it didn't allow me to be free. It didn't allow me to be trusting of anybody. And like I said, the one positive influence I had as a young kid, I kind of made a decision there. Shit, I think I'd rather be in the bush with the moose than running around doing what I was doing. I was selling crack, though, by the time I was 13. You know? I remember the cops stopping me. They found these rock things in my pocket, and they fucking threw them away because people didn't know what crack was yet, right? So the cops just threw it away, like, we'll just fuck up his world, right? And yeah, there I was, running into the curb looking for what I was looking for. I'm fucking 13 years old. Like I didn't know what I really had. You know, all I knew is I had so much money to bring back to my uncle. That's all I knew, right? I knew what the bill was worth, right? And I knew what would happen to me if I didn't bring back that money. And so it was always done like that at a really young age. So I think when I became an adolescent, I always knew I could go back. I had a choice, right? And I made a pivotal choice in my life. But I always used that other side to put that extra $500 in my pocket, you know? I didn't want to jump in all the way. And I think one of the reasons why I didn't want to jump in all the way, I saw everybody get arrested. I saw the murders. I mean, where I was coming from, we could look through the family portrait and know who killed who. That's what we were looking at, right? And so for me, and even my mom was always like, I taught you how to be a pimp, not a drug dealer. What the fuck are you doing, right? Like, she never wanted that for me, but it ended up becoming, you know? And I think when you have that mentality, growing up in that mentality, I mean, I made great money as a land surveyor, but I made way more money selling drugs, you know, way more money selling drugs and doing the shit that I was doing, you know? And it's so hard to change young men from that, especially growing up in that life, you know? When did you realize that your father's identity was not your own?
Oh, it took a lot of suffering before that happened. You know, like, I didn't even realize, like, what level of the underworld, like, he was involved in until I ended up going to jail on my own accord. Like, I was never involved with anything directly with my dad, but I tried to associate myself in the same neck of the woods, just not directly with him, because I didn't want to heat him out. And but once I like found out who he was, I was actually taken aback. Like, I didn't actually know his, like, standing in whatever organization until I was in jail, and I met people who, like, were way older than me that told me about, like, stories about his past, and I was like, holy crap. And then like, I didn't realize that, you know, like, I wasn't made out or like, I wasn't interested or wanting to be on that path until, like, I was 25, so like 5 years ago, because I'm 30 now, almost 31.
Yeah.
And yeah, it took a lot of suffering. Like, over the last 10 years, I've been in and out of incarceration for 7 out of the last 10 years. And like, all that stuff was on my own. Like, I never wanted to like, get my family in trouble. So, like, whatever criminal stuff I did on my own. Mm-hmm. But it was definitely influenced from a young age that, you know, like, I was cut out for something else than the average Joe. You know, I thought of the average Joe as a sucker. Like, I'm not going to slave the rest of my life away. I'm gonna live by my own rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for myself, it was the last time I was in jail. The last time I was in jail, it was a breaking point. I mean, this was the first time ever I got charged with personal amount, right? And I remember calling my family, and they're like, "You're a fucking junkie," you know. The amount of drugs you had in your pocket was not making anybody money, you know. You're a junkie. And when that happened, I realized I'm not like them, you know. And if there's one thing that people who grow up in this world come to understand, is this: we know what it's like to sit next to a sociopath and a homicidal maniac. There's a feeling that nobody else understands. There's a look in somebody's eye that you will never, ever forget. And I realized in that moment in jail, I'm not that. You know, put to the test, if I really had to, it was my life or their life. That's human nature. That's just what humans do. We are animals. That's what we came from. But I am not somebody who doesn't feel the guilt and shame about it afterwards. Those guys are. And I realized I will never be in that place in my mind. I feel I'm not like them. And if that means I have to be an addict to walk away, I'll play and be an addict to walk away. And the first time I identified myself that way, I wasn't even identifying that I was an addict. it was just for me to get away, because I had realized now I'd gone way too deep. And the catalyst for me jumping and breaking bad, really, my daughter died. And so when my daughter died, which was just an accident, like it was not by the hands of anybody else, that's when I went in. And I went in deep, you know. I was kicked out of towns from my family, saying you're way too heady here, you have to go somewhere else. And that's what I did, because you listen to your orders, you know. And but that last time in jail, I had realized I'm not the guy who can stomp the fuck out of somebody's head and have an inch of blood on the ground and revel in that. I'm not that person, and I'll never be that person. I don't think you can cross that line. I think either you're just born that way or you're not born that way. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. For me now, like, I look at anybody that's involved criminally, like they're compensating for some form of insecurity. You know, maybe it is a mental health issue where they have some sociopath or whatever medical diagnosis you want to give it. But I think anybody that's doing harm to other people, you know, they're compensating either for an insecurity, or maybe they had some trauma in their life that they haven't like recuperated from or healed from, and they're just making up for that in different ways, and they're doing it unconsciously. I think, like for me, I realized that it was all fake. I came to a point where everybody who thought they were like bad or gangster or had something to prove, it was ego. It was just an ego. It was a persona. It was a mask that they were wearing to cover something up, and they were living in a very tangible life. Like they had no sense of, like they just weren't smart. You know, they were very like caveman instinct. Like it was like they have a disagreement with somebody, they punch them out. Somebody hurts their feelings, they punch them out. It's like,
when in doubt, knock them out. Right?
Deal with your shit, man. Like, go read a book. You're embarrassing.
I think that's what I was kind of getting at in the fact of this. I was holding a personification, but those guys that you can sit across the table from in that world and know that they're not holding a mask, that is literally who they are. And it's a very small select few. It's not all of them. Like societally, they say 10% of the society is like that. So if you think about that underworld, 10% is even a sliver in their world. You know, it's very, very small. And so that's what I'm saying is the people who are really bought into that and bought into that world, they're bought into the fraternity of it. They're brought into that brotherhoodism. And you're totally right. And I would agree with you that it's a compensation. They're compensating for lack of self-esteem, life skills, and a plethora of other things.
Yeah, there's so many different issues that could cause somebody to...
And to sit here and say that you can change the world by giving one solution, it's an impossibility. Because the reality is that this is a systematic issue that is reinforced by poverty and reinforced by that ego and pride and idolism that society is pushing. I mean, I think the worst thing that could ever have happened was Sons of Anarchy romanticizing one portion of an organized criminal life. And then when you look at Sopranos, it did the same thing. Those people are not like that. Like yesterday's podcast, we were talking about, you know, when I was growing up, Hulk Hogan was one of my idols. But I bet you my uncle could kick the shit out of him, right? Like, and then the guy who's sitting across from me was a baby boomer, and his idol was John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, you know?
Yeah.
So society that itself has personified, and they've idolized living in that lifestyle. Like, these guys must be special. No, most of them are dumber than a fucking box of hammers. You know what I mean? Most of them are. Yeah. And the guys who are the smartest in that realm end up being somewhat statured, and then even from there, the ones who are really ruthless and smart are the ones that you know you can't be. And when you finally take a full assessment of yourself and you realize that you have emotions, you understand what it is to be empathetic and guilt and shame, and you know these things, you're not going to rise to that person. So you have to figure out where your intelligence is laying out, you know? It's almost like trying to sit down with a school social worker when it comes down to your employment. However, you can't because you can't tell them that I have 3 options. Either I'm going to run the show, or I'm going to be a murderer, or I'm going to build bombs. I don't know which one I'm going to be, but one of the 3 is going to happen. And I have to figure out where my intelligence sits. I mean, what fucking person wants to sit down and even think about that when you realize you can't go through with any of that? You know, you realize that you're not past that line, right?
Yeah, that was a conversation I had was with myself internally for a long time. It's like, could I ever kill somebody? Like, am I really cut out for this? Like, what happens if it came down to it? You know, what's going to happen? And it was something that, like, I didn't want to ever picture myself doing. Like, I cannot hurt somebody and then not feel guilty after. I just can't do it. And like the times that I did hurt somebody out of like anger or aggression or ego or whatever it was that caused the altercation, then afterwards I was looking at myself like, why did I really have to come down to that? Like, what could I have done to avoid that? Like, what's going to happen to this person now? And like, how is this going to affect me? And like, is karma going to come get me now? Like, am I guilty? Like, what's going to happen? And
the other shoe happens, right? That other shoe, that proverbial other shoe above your head is sitting above your head and you're waiting for it to drop, right?
Well, for a long time, like, I think the guilt of some of the things that I've done in my life played into my later drug use. And like, I would look at myself in the mirror and I'd almost be ashamed of certain things that I've done. And then, but that would go away when I would get high or drunk, because that would just feed my ego and make me feel like I'm crazier, because I'm just a little guy, right? So I grew up thinking like crazy beats big any day of the week. That was like my favorite saying. So I had just had to be buck as fuck with everything I did. And that included like when it came down to the party time or whatever, like I would go all in. I didn't care. Nothing could hurt me.
And I think that's all of us in that world. We always have to rise above than the next guy. But some of the guys that you're sitting next to, you can't go past what they've done. You just don't have the emotion or the aptitude to do it. You know what I mean? Like, call it parts, right? You just don't have the mental parts to do what they've done, and nor do you ever want to have those mental parts. And so we are measuring up to people that we've known. Like, I'll never forget when I realized, so this guy was like a godfather to me growing up. Okay, being French and Italian, I'm 100% Catholic, and realized that, you know, he was a straight murderer. There was no two ways about it. That was his entire life. That's all he ever did. That was the only job he ever knew and the only job he ever held. Okay, did he know how to spin a wrench? Not even a bit. Did he know how to break your arm by spinning your arm? Yeah. You know, he knew how to break you down in any way. And realizing that this was the guy I was drinking with, going, fucking this hierarchy, how the hell am I ever going to get past what he's done? Because that's what it boils down to your head. And I mean, that's a sick competition that's going on, right?
Yeah, but that's not just even in the criminal world. That's in all society together. Everybody's competing with each other. And then the media and the way the systematic, there's systematic issues that have been around forever. Just like you said, how baby boomers idolized John Wayne and so forth. You know, that plays into every level of society, whether it's like the business world or the medical world or the stock market, or, you know, even the nonprofit industries. Like,
not for profit world is
there's a whole nother podcast for a different day.
That's a whole another issue. One of the things I want to ask you is, what changed the last day you walked out of jail? What changed?
So the change happened before the last time I went to jail. So in are we allowed to say where we're at here?
If you want.
The city?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so in Edmonton, they have this new remand. It's ridiculously huge. And so like I said, out of the last 10 years, I did 7 in. Well, this last time I went in, I really decided that I wanted to make some fundamental changes in my life. Like, I have 2 daughters and there's 8 and 9 years old. And it's like, I missed big portions of their life already, and like I really needed to be an active role in their life, and I really needed to uh, internally make up for the mistakes that I did, because I needed to stop beating myself up for it. I needed to stop, using drugs because I was beating myself up for it. Otherwise, I was going to die. Like I came close to death a few times, and just like pure self-destruct mode. And also, like the last time I went to jail, like it was a serious incident, and I had to come to terms with like whatever happened. I needed to forgive myself. And in order to do that, I needed to start taking positive action in order to give myself a reason to forgive myself. So the first step was like being incarcerated, looking at a serious amount of time. What could I do while I'm inside, regardless of whether I get convicted of it or have to serve a long amount of time? What can I start doing today to make a difference so I am eligible for my own self-love? The first option that I thought of was, so there's like a pilot project that's happening in the Edmonton Remand Center. And to me, this is the first time I've ever witnessed restorative justice. And that's called the boot camp units. And in the Remand Center, there's 2 units dedicated called boot camp, 1A and 1B. And these boot camp units are a volunteer-based program where inmates, upon good behavior, can apply to go to these units where there's a couple extra privileges and perks. You don't have to wear orange coveralls. You get to wear sweats, and you get a couple extra gym equipment. You get some, there's access to self-development program and some good books, and but you're forced to like adhere to the rules and the standards of these boot camp units, which is like heavily influenced by the guards that created the program, which are ex-military. So there is, you'd have to do drill. You'd have to like stand at attention for count. You'd have to sound off. You'd have to sing a cadence. You would have to have your cells immaculate every day, all day long, like inspection ready. And we would have to do presentations for like different MLAs or government officials or groups of lawyers and judges that would come in to witness the spectacle in the remand of these 2 units and see the change and the progress that it's having on the inmates that are actively participating in it. And when I got to these units, I was like really taken back. It was never the setting I've ever thought I'd see inside a jail. And people were like polite and proper, and they were all attentive and sober and healthy. And
so wait a minute. So you're telling me that there's drugs in jail?
No, it's hidden. So yeah, it's like before, like when I was, people were dying, ODing on fentanyl around me because it was just nothing but a steady party.
Yeah.
And like people were ODing on the weekly on these other units, and on these 2 boot camp units, they were dry fundamentally. Sometimes it squeaks in because there are a few people that are there for the wrong reasons, and they're just trying to capitalize on the perks.
Yeah.
But the majority of the guys there are fighting the good fight for self-development and to improve their life and to start making some changes. When I arrived on these units, on this unit, like I seen huge opportunity for myself to make some changes. The first thing I noticed was this library that they had of these self-development books, like all these spiritual gurus and like Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, Shakti Gawain, Louise Hay, and then there was books on like metaphysics and the law of attraction and like different like cool stuff like channeling. We had access to like the Norquest programs right away, as opposed to like when you're on a different unit, you can apply for that stuff, but you're looking at like a 4 to 6 month wait to get into do upgrading. But when you're on these boot camp units, you're only looking at like a 30 to 60 day wait. I'll get into it in a little bit, but there was this program called PEAK there, and PEAK stands for Positive Energy, Action, and Knowledge. So that's why it had this extensive self-development library. Is the guy that created that program donated all these books. But anyway, so I started like reading all these books and applying myself to these programs. I quickly became a leader and started helping facilitate the program to the guys. and introducing different life skills that I learned out of these books that we'd practice in our little community. And we actually we would read these lessons out of the book, like certain goal setting exercises, like the ideal scene exercise from the guy's name's Mark Allen. He wrote a book called The Magical Path, and in there he explains this exercise. He says it's like the one all end all. You can manifest anything you want. It's called the ideal scene exercise, where you picture your life 5 years down the road as good as it could possibly get, and then you like go into fine details about it, like what kind of employment, or do I own a business, how much money do I got, how's my family, what are my kids like what kind of vehicles do I have? Like, how do I dress every day? What does my leisure time look like? And you like go into that. And then once you have like this good image in your head, you start writing it down, you know, and you like say you fill up like 2-3 pages of information of like what the best possible outcome would be for you in 5 years. And then you just kind of like keep that with you. You read it once in a while. You kind of like submit it to your memory, and then it impregnates your subconscious mind. And then like through whatever majestic method you want to recognize that it comes to you, but it comes to you, you know, whether it be the law of attraction or God or however you want to put it, but it happens. And this guy swears by it. So like certain things like that, we would practice and we would do it, and like it would start happening, you know, like whether like you write on there that you like fix the relationship with the mother of your kids or something like that. Then next thing you know, like 2 months down the road, you're starting to fix that relationship with the mother of your kids. It's like once you write it down on paper, you kind of like materialize it for the first time. It becomes tangible, and then it like starts happening.
I think yesterday we were having a conversation about self-esteem. That was yesterday's topic, essentially, right? And so this guy who's a baby boomer sitting across from me, we realized that the deficiencies in our self-esteem are exactly the same. Doesn't matter that I'm a millennial and that he's a baby boomer. We have the same issues. And so one of the things that we had come to realize was that we need to set up a day where goals are set. So for instance, what we had basically comprised was in the morning, we need to humble ourselves. So if you've ever met anybody who's lived in Nepal or even in the mountains in Canada, or by people who live by great big lakes, so on and so forth, they have a visible thing that they can see that reminds them of how small they are. So there's their humility practiced right away, right? It's seen and it's there. So what we do is we wake up and we practice our humility in whatever way. So God, odd, whatever you want to call it, the stars, the sun, the stream, doesn't matter. You make reverence to it in the context of, thanks for today, and may it be of service to somebody. Can I do something to help somebody? If it be that's what you want from me, then from there, you go to the gym and you work out. And the reason why you work out is you now put that challenge in front of you, that physical challenge that you can overcome. So now by overcoming that, your emotional stability will be there. So now you're going to work, and your emotional stability is there, and you can also be of service to somebody. So if I commit myself to being or accepting humility first thing in the morning, then also put in front of me some sort of challenge that I can overcome, and then go to work, I will be emotionally stable because I'm on an even playing field. Then I can be of service. So if I do those 4 things and they're constantly in front of me, now what we say is we're practicing success. Because if there's anything I've seen, so I've been around for a little while in a sober context, right? In this world now. And if there's anything that I've seen time and time again, is people are afraid of success. Okay, so success will happen, and it's in their feet. It's on the verge. And then they self-sabotage and shit all over the bed. And the reason why they're doing that is because they don't know how to practice being successful. So if you take that inventory every day of how you accomplished those things, all of a sudden you have now a bank full of goals that you've set.
Of accomplishments before noon.
and then, yeah, exactly. And then what ends up happening is when you're faced with success, real success, that's from an external, not an internal, the external doesn't mean as much as your internal. Because every day you know you're getting it done. And that's where self-esteem is.
Self-efficacy.
That's right. And so, and then
you start building it up.
And then the next thing is you now get to identify the difference between what ego and pride is and true self-esteem. Ego and pride is a memory. You have to remember the shit that you've done in order to maintain ego and pride. Self-esteem, you have no inventory because your goals are being achieved on a daily basis, and you understand what success is because you were successful that day.
You build an intrinsic desire to succeed.
And that in itself is how people can succeed. So when we were looking at coming out of jail, when I came out of jail, the only thing I was hoping to get to was fucking Henwood. I wanted to get treatment. That was it. I knew I had I was 9 months sober. So I was 9 months on dead time and came out. Finally, some judge decided to give me bail. So I shit the bed on an $80,000 bail. And my second bail came out to $2,500. God or odd, believe whatever the fuck you want. I got a $2,500 bail, and still to this day, I don't know who paid it. Like, I don't know.
God or odd.
I shit you not. Like, I have not a fucking clue who paid it. Get out, and my treatment date was 30 days later. Okay?
You had 30 days to wait.
30 days to wait, and the people who are taking me are junkies.
Yeah, perfect.
So the only reason why I didn't use over those 30 days was because they used it faster than I could ask. And I'm talking, when I was released, I shit you not, I'll never forget this on my bail papers. It told the people who were picking me up how to drive back to the house that they were taking me to. They had to drive an exact route. And I assure you, when I got out of jail, the cops followed us all the way. RCMP, they followed us right through the route. Had we stopped for Tim Hortons coffee, imagine not getting Tim Hortons coffee coming out of jail. No fucking perk coffee, right?
Is Tim Hortons going to pay you for this right now? Did you just
I
mention
hope
them?
so. Yeah. So here we were going to this place, and I'm like, this was the first time I really white knuckled it. I mean, in jail, the environment, I can handle that. I can be sober in jail. I mean, fuck, it's so structured, it didn't matter, right? Yeah. But then once I got out, the beer thoughts were like fully with me. I really wanted that. I really, really wanted it. I really wanted coke. I fucking totally wanted heroin. Those were my serious vices. And we got down to where they were, and they lived in the country, so they would only bring in enough for the night. And of course, good junkies that they were, they would hide it from me because how dare I fucking ask for some, right? And I remember literally banging my head against the fucking wall trying to get through that. And I was dealing with Alberta Health Services at that time in order to get me into treatment, and they couldn't make it happen fast enough, And when I finally...
They still can't.
Yeah. So when I finally got into treatment, I think the only reason why I was successful out of that treatment was because I literally had 9 months abstinence time, because when I was in, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was not approved by Alberta Health Services. Therefore, we were not given it. We weren't allowed to read it. So I got to treatment, and because of the time of that 30-day waiting period, I realized how much of a fucking junkie and fuck up I really was with my drugs and alcohol. There was a portion of my mind as I was being released. I knew that there was something fucked up in my head, but I couldn't really conceive because I was playing that idea that I was an addict so my family would just leave me alone. Literally, they labeled me no good. I mean, this guy, we gave him enough dope to keep a fucking small town sedated, and you still fucked it up. And you get pinched for
peanuts
for a joke, And so I was okay with holding that as long as no good was attached to being an addict. I was okay with that. I could accept that. I could handle it. And then, like I said, when I got into treatment, realizing, you're a really fucked up individual, man. Like, drugs and alcohol is truly riding your life, right? I got out of Henwood, finished rehab and or treatment, and that's when I got involved with a 3-quarter house, and then from there just took off. It wasn't all great. I was still on the government tit for a long time. Still am today. The government likes to know where I am. They like to make sure that I'm not hurting anybody, and I'm not doing what I'm doing. There are certain places I'm literally not allowed to go. I have a map that when I see my contact with the government, I have a map and they say, were you in this neighborhood? Nope, I wasn't. So if we look at surveillance, you're not in that neighborhood? Yeah, I wasn't in that neighborhood. I mean, just a little while. I don't know if people know this, but we're going to get into restorative justice in a second here, but they're no longer putting bracelets on everybody.
They don't need to. They can track us by our phones.
They're actually giving you an app on your phone. You have to accept it before you leave, and they can see you throughout the day, and it just records all day long of where you were, what you were doing, and if they decide, and they also listen to your phone. So now when people are going for bails and stuff, before it used to be like, you're not allowed a cell phone. We only want you to have a home phone.
Now they want you to have the cell phone.
Now it's the cell phone. So if anybody was real smart out there, what you would do is you would sell cell phones just for convicts coming out of jail. make an entire industry on that, right? So
the gears are turning.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's the break, right? There, and between the stories, I mean, that's the reality, that mental break has to happen. That recognition needs to happen that I'm not the mold. I'm not that mold. I am who I am. I've never had my own identity. And then we can move on from there. Because if we don't make that determination, that realization, we're fucked, you know?
Yeah. Like a big thing for anybody that either is like strung on drugs, trying to make positive change, or somebody that just went through like an identity crisis and they're trying to figure it out, like, you got to set some goals, man. You got to just like, what do you want? And that's like that simple ideal scene exercise, or like this one from Jack Canfield, the guy who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yeah, yeah.
He had this book called Aladdin's Lamp, something like that. And in it is 101 wishes from the lamp. It's an exercise. Come up with 101 wishes for yourself. Anything. It could be ridiculous. It could be like, I want to ride pink elephants in India for a year straight. It could be some, but like just to sit down and come up with 101 wishes for yourself, like that's a true test of self-worth. I know, like when I did it, like trying to come up with 101 things that I want for myself, it really like defined me. It was a first chance to define me on my terms.
Yeah, yeah.
Not like me on my father's terms, or not me on society's terms.
Yeah.
It's like, what effect do I want to have in the world? What kind of father do I want to be? Like, what kind of legacy do I want to leave in my life? These little exercises like that, you know, that's what really helped me turn my life around. I can tell you one thing. The first statement I heard out of the guard's mouth when I went to that boot camp, the guy's name is Mr. Vey, and this guy is awesome. Like, for a correctional staff, like, he really set the bar. Like, he's an impeccable character. He really cares about helping guys change. But he was giving us a lecture, and I didn't know what to think of it at first. You know, this old war vet with a Monopoly Man mustache screaming at us. But he goes, "Gentlemen, tonight when you go into your houses," or he didn't call them houses, he refused to call them houses. "When you go into your cells, look at yourself in the mirror and unfuck yourselves." And he goes, "I'll see you in the morning." And that was it. And I was like, unfuck myself. And I went in my cell and I looked at myself in the mirror. I said, "Buddy, you are unfucked. From this point on, you are unfucked."
Yeah.
And that was like the trigger switch for me. It's like, for some reason, I felt like my grandpa, who was also a war vet, was like whispering that through him to me. And it hit home with me. And then from that point on, like, I was like destined to like learn as much as I could, destined to not be afraid to succeed. Like, I was just determined to absorb knowledge and use it as and become wise.
Yeah.
You know, like, you can have all this stored knowledge, but if you don't actually put it to use to produce fruit in your life, then you are not wise.
Well, and that's why I went back to what challenges are you giving yourself every day? Because it's like this. You could, if all you could do is walk 4 blocks that day. Okay, so you walk 4 blocks in the city. And that's fine. You do that for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden you say to yourself, "Shit, I'm going to walk 5." Okay, well, now you've achieved a goal. And it doesn't matter how small the goal is, because the quantity doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is you did more. You did a little bit extra, right? That's all that matters. Because the worst, it's like this. If you call yourself shit your entire life, and then how long do you think it's going to take for you to recognize that you're not shit? And how much reinforcement is it going to take in order to accept that you're not shit? I mean, You could work out for a year and still feel like a pile of shit if you're not reinforcing all of those challenges and goals that you need to do throughout the day. You know, one is not going to be enough. It has to be all. And I think whether you be an addict or a normie or an ex-convict or a person who's never been here, the fact of the matter is we're all ditch to ditch. None of us drive on the road. None of us know what mediocrity is. We're either all in or all out. And I think that's the majority, especially now looking at society, that's the majority of society. We're either all in or all out. And so in that case, are you all positive or are you just all a pile of shit? It's your choice.
Yeah.
But you're the one who has to reinforce that choice. Ain't nobody helping. I mean, I wake up every morning and I do my humility thing. I humble myself. And
Affirmations.
then I come down here and I do my workout. But I'll tell you, before I do my workout, first thought in my head is, fuck, Justin, you could give it another day. I'll fucking lay in bed just a little longer, man. And I don't have to go very far to get my workout in. But I guarantee you those thoughts are setting in. And then the next thought is, Justin, if you don't move right fucking now, this isn't happening today, right? So then you got to get going. You got to do it, right? There is no... I think there comes a time in one's life where there is no let's put it off. It won't exist anymore. Either you're going to do it now or you're never going to do it. You know,
honestly, like I would love to just hammer away back and forth with you about self-development, and I really think we should do another podcast strictly for that.
Yeah.
Because like that's my heart and soul.
Mm-hmm.
But like I want to go back to like restorative justice in the system, and like I don't want to take a stab at any like political body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm nonpartisan. I'm not going to say that any form of the government is fucked up, but I am going to say that there could be some changes made that could really help some people.
So I'll throw out the information. So the recidivism rate right now is a range from 2 to 8%. They talk about treatment program in correctional facilities in the Canadian system. Treatment program in the Canadian system is what we call restorative justice. Restorative justice was a ideology that the Canadian government took on in about 1970 and implemented it by 1976. When we talk about restorative justice is Indigenous justice programs, which means that there's a judiciary on reserves here in Canada just made for Indigenous people who are not going to be put in front of the local judiciary. Their judiciary is only on their reservation. The next one is the Victim Fund, which basically helps victims financially, and it also allows a victim to do a one-on-one with their offender if it be a violent offense. The next one is restorative justice at correctional facility, which is also one-on-one. They will help you get in contact with the Victim Fund in order to be able to do a one-on-one with your victim, or as well as there's courses that you have to take, which are role-playing courses, so that you know how to act in society. Apparently, that's basically a part of that.
How is any of that restorative justice?
Well, we'll get through the plethora of their programs. Then the next one is youth justice. So they have a youth justice fund, which also helps out with like the program where the youth get to go out into the wilderness camps and stuff. That's where all that's a part of. Now, if we're going to look at recidivism rate between the two, this 2 to 8% is only for adults. For youth, it's less than 1%. The stat on that 2 to 8% is put over 2 years. The reason why they can't go to a year is because everybody reoffends in their first year. And when you go to 3, everybody reoffends within the third year. The sweet spot is within 2 years. You get a lull, because if anybody knows anything about corrections, it basically works in shifts. Criminals come out and they go back in a shift. We all have an expiry date, and that could be 8 or 9 months, or it could be 18 months, or sometimes it's 24 months. But it's all within a variation of a number that keeps on going back. I mean, when you look at recidivism rates have a direct correlation with how long somebody's out. And if you look at those correlations, it's probation times, right? Probation times correlate recidivism rates. It's crazy how that works. Now, the next one is community service. So community service being fine option. So you can go and get your fines paid. I'm just saying this for the listeners who are not about corrections or know nothing. They're ignorant towards the system. So community service is fine option, did a DUI, first time, you owe $1,500. So then you go and do fine option for that. There's also financial restitution to victims. So if you're a drug dealer and were convicted with possession for the purpose, you would have a financial restitution of $2,500 towards the victim fund. Now, house arrest is also under restorative justice, which basically means you serve your time in the community because the court system has decided that you're not a danger to the community. And you are literally, it is what it says. It's house arrest. You are in your house. You're not allowed to leave. Here in Canada and also in America, we've adopted this program from America called drug court. So the targeted capacities, which is per year, in Toronto, there's only 50 people taken in per year. In Vancouver, that number is 100. In Edmonton, it's 30. In Winnipeg, it's also 30. In Ottawa, it's 35. And Regina is also 30. When we look at the statistical positive rate out of drug court, it's only, again, 2 to 8% that make it out of drug court without catching another offense. And in that's essentially where restorative justice stops in Canada. Those are our programs. We do have a diversion program. So if it's your first charge ever, you can take a diversion program, which is 3 months probation. It is a guilty plea, but it'll never show up on your record. And we also have mental diversion now. Here in Canada, mental diversion is basically saying, I'm schizophrenic, I wasn't on my meds, and I acted out. Didn't know what I was doing. I'm on my meds now. And then you would continue on that counseling work with something like FACS or Alberta Health Services afterwards. Okay. FACS is a part. FACS is the forensic, I forget what the acronym stands for now. Forensic Analysis of Criminal Activity, I believe.
They do pre-sentence reports.
Yeah. Which typically are not in the best, like it's not for the client or offender. Typically they're bad.
They want to keep people in jail.
Yeah. So
how much money does it cost the taxpayers to keep an inmate incarcerated per day? So in Alberta, they will never, or most provinces in Canada, they will never come out with a daily number. They'll never come out with a daily number in the provincial correctional institutions. So the only number that we have to rely on, and I will put a disclaimer, all the information that I just came out with comes from the federal government. None of this comes from the provinces. And the reason why the provinces won't put out numbers is because the actual taxpayers would lose their grip if they were to see the real numbers. So that federal number is $115 a day for federal penitentiary. We have estimated provincially it's $185 a day. Yeah, I heard it's a little bit more than federal, yeah. So
now the other thing is that I would like to, I'll spin this in and then we'll get talking as well, is here in Canada, it's better to go into the federal system than it is to be in the provincial system. Reason being, in the federal system, you're going to get a segue back into society. When it comes to the provincial system, that's not happening. There is no reintegration program from any there's a reintegration program from the Ontario government in Canada. There's also one from Quebec, and there's also one in British Columbia. And so when we're looking at that, all the other provinces do not have a reintegration process at all. So in the federal system in Canada, when you are going for parole or for release, there is a reintegration process unless you max out your time. What we're seeing here in Canada now is we have these things called minimum mandatory sentences. And in minimum mandatory sentences, you are not allowed to apply for parole until 50% of your sentence is up. And because of this, our correctional centers or facilities are unable to accommodate an early release. So everybody's getting maxed out. Now, the biggest charge that they're doing this with is a thing called possession for the purpose, which doesn't mean that you've been charged with trafficking in Canada. What it means is that you had enough drugs to be selling drugs like a drug dealer. And that holds a 3-year minimum mandatory in Canada, which means you'll max out 3 years and then they toss you back out into society, essentially homeless, unless you clicked up with some sort of organization while you were in there. Would you agree, Ken, that that the incentive to become a federal inmate
is way higher? Yeah, lots of people are copping out quick to go to the pen for a number of reasons. One being, like, if you're a provincial inmate, you're stuck doing 2/3 of your time no matter what. And then if you go to the pen, especially if it's your first pen bit, you can get paroled pretty quick. And like right now with the government change, guys are getting out 1/3.
So I'm going to throw this at you. Most people don't know this, but when it comes to a parole stat, 97% of people who are paroled in the federal system are put back into jail in the first 90 days.
Wow.
And the reasoning for that...
Suspicion of suspicion?
Yeah, suspicion of suspicion is what they use. So basically the way how that works for the listeners is if the probation officer believes that you're suspicious of suspicious activity, they can throw you back into jail. But really correctional or probation officers are using this because there's so many people on the system in probation that's the only way to control their files. I mean, you think about a probation officer, some of them have a caseload of 800 people. Wow. 800, yeah, in the federal system. It's nuts. They're paid well. They make very good money. But the issue is they're way over inundated when it comes to actually being able to do what the program is. So instance,
they're not going to be able to provide value if they're carrying a weight load like that. Like, how can they be able to help you find programming? Like, that's a big thing I want to talk about is programming. Like, to me, restorative justice is how do you restore the offender back to like the mind state before he had criminal intentions? Mm-hmm. You know, say you're in a violent offender. Where were you? How young do you have to be to go back before those criminal intentions, those violent intentions were ingrained in you? Mm-hmm. And if that's like childhood, then how do we heal the trauma that caused the violent intentions? Like, that's restorative justice to me. How do we for a drug dealer, how do we give them the life skills, the self-esteem, and help them change their intentions to something that's more positive for humanity as a whole? Like,
and I think one of the things that we need to look at is there needs to be progress right now. If you're going to change somebody's mind, I mean, let's face it, I made way more money in active addiction than I ever did in active recovery. That's a reality. But why did I stay with active recovery? Was because I saw the benefit of it right now. I saw progress in the moment, in real time. I didn't have to wait. It was here now. And so if we can provide some sort of environment where we're able to simulate that in our society, we will see people actually become something. So for instance, in the Scandinavian countries, the heaviest sentence which is death, for murder, is only an 8-year sentence. There's no such thing as life there because they actually believe in behavioral modification, because that's what it boils down to here. And when you talk to anybody from the correctional facility itself, and even being an inmate, it's life skills. People don't have life skills. And the only reasons why they have life skills in jail is because the structure is there, right? And when the structure is there, either they can adhere to it or they can disregard it. And so when they disregard it, I mean, they're just a junkie in jail. That's basically what it boils down to. And they're sitting there warehousing their time.
That's it right there. You're the corrections in Alberta, because that's my experience, warehouses individuals with other individuals who are just as fucked up or more fucked up as they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no restoring anything. That's not restorative justice.
No. And
that's making the problem worse. And that's why it's a revolving door.
Yeah. I think the other thing to recognize too is that when we say remand center is people who haven't been sentenced yet.
Or haven't been convicted.
Yeah. Yeah. Convicted or sentenced. Yeah. So essentially, you're innocent until proven guilty is bullshit. It's all about making money for you going out. And here in Canada, the Crown, which is essentially the government, takes all of that bail money if you fuck it up. So if they take your bail money away, it's not like a bounty hunter is going to be getting that money. Our government actually gets that money. And like I said, I had an $80,000 bail. They never got it, but they could have, and if they could have, I wasn't getting a tax write-off for it. I mean, they just got it. Right. So they're not using any of that money, in my opinion, for any good, and even in the incarcerated system that we have, I mean, fucking guards tell you on the way out, see you soon.
Yeah.
I mean, the guards are there to recognize that this is an industry. I mean, any Canadian taxpayer to believe that they're not making money off of us. They're making more money off of convicts than they are anybody else in the justice system. I mean, think about it this way. You get yourself a jogging suit at Walmart. It costs you $20 top end. In jail, that's going to cost you $100. Who's making $80? Okay. Who's making $80? That's the province, right? That's the province who's making that. And so when we talk about food, they give you a diet of 14 pieces of bread a day. So that's $3. It's a little bit more than a loaf of bread.
What is it? It's either 1,800 or 2,100 calories per day. That's all the food you get.
Yeah.
And it's the majority of it is bread.
Yeah. I mean, that's the reality. So the value, in my opinion, of what taxpayers are getting is brutal. There is no value. There is no restoration of that person. Instead, it becomes a write-off. In the federal system, I see more advantages to people who do change their life around from the federal system. But we need to stop people going to a length. I mean, let's face it, if you're going to the federal system, that means that you've committed a crime that's either more violent, more drugs, or more yield of something that's negative towards your community. That's a reality.
2 years and up to be federal inmate.
Yeah. So when you're in the province, why are they not stopping that before going to the federal institution? They're not. They're actually encouraging it to do harder crime in order to get to that federal system. It's crazy, right? I mean, it's pretty crazy when we look at coming out of the federal system. The stat is 2 to 8%. When we look at provincially, and I only got this from a probation officer, so it's not. I mean, it's their internal number. It's 1%.
For how long?
Over 3 years. So the province goes 3 years because everybody's 2 years less. So they do the follow-up in the third year that your sentencing would be precluded. And they have 1% success.
So 99% of people end up going back within 3 years.
And
That's disgusting.
And then you look at the programs that they have. I mean, drug court is a fairly good program, but because the numbers are so small, how do you expect to get anything bigger than a 2 and 8%? You're not. I mean, out of 50 people, you're talking less than 2 people.
Drug court has good intentions. Good intentions.
And good intentions lead you where, right?
But it's not solving any issues for these guys on a core level. Like the programming isn't there so they can deal with like the past trauma or whatever it's causing them to live a life of crime and addiction. I
mean, it's one of these things where we're telling people, we're forcing them, saying you have to change your life. And really, if you want to change your life, it needs to be an individual decision that you make. And when you give somebody the option to go to drug court, or you give them the option to go to jail, okay, drug court is basically doing your time in society and showing up to court. And you have all these programs that you have to complete in that program.
You have to go to X amount of AA or NA meetings a week, and you have to go make a presence in the courtroom every Wednesday.
So in saying that, when we look at that program, like I said, I believe it's got good intentions, but the premise of it, people are not really choosing that program. Instead, they're making the choice because it's an easier, softer way. And drug court itself says many times in Canada, it takes the average addict 7 times in rehab in order to finally get sober. Well, the reason for that, I mean, we're very fortunate in Canada where treatment and drug rehab is free for every Canadian. I mean, sure, there's a waiting list, but it's still free. It's not like America. Yet, why is it people from drug court keep on relapsing and are on a recidivistic cycle? Is because they didn't actually make this choice because they hit the rock bottom. They made this choice because this was a diversion from the federal penitentiary. And that's the reality. In my opinion, drug court needs to take the worst of the worst. The guys who are at the bottom, who feel no hope, and they have nothing left. Those are the guys who will be successful. Any of the men that I've worked with, the guy who smells like shit and piss, he's the guy who's going to make it. But the guy who walks in with a suit and says, I think my wife told me I have a drinking problem, that guy has a lot further to go. That could be his bottom if he so chooses. But
it's different for everybody. I've seen seen both ends of the spectrum actually, you know what, that's not true. I've seen both ends of the spectrum fail, not make it, because very few people actually make it coming out of anything, any institution, drug court, or treatment center. I've seen very few make it in this province.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think one of the reasons is because we're not affording the opportunity to the guy who's really at the bottom. I don't mean the physical bottom that I was describing is only so that people can picture that. But the reality is it's somebody who's truly hopeless, somebody who's truly not making it. Because you can be hopeless in a suit or you can be hopeless in the gutter. It doesn't matter. As long as you're hopeless, now you're willing to change and be teachable, provided that you remember that hopelessness.
Yeah.
As long as that's your motivation to continue through, you'll probably make it.
Well, you don't change, nothing changes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So in saying that, I mean, where drug court is going wrong, in my opinion, is they say you can only come in if you have a trafficking charge or possession charge. They won't even take you if you have possession for the purpose anymore.
I think that's contradicting to their mission. Like, drug dealers are drug dealers for the lifestyle and the money, and the drug addict on the side of the street that is homeless and broke and suffering from mental health issues, that's the guy that needs drug court. That's the guy that needs the programming. Because if you keep pampering drug dealers, they're going to continue to sell drugs. Yeah.
And then there's also segue in that too, where some drug dealers are just doing this to perpetuate their addiction, and some drug dealers are actually making money. I mean, every drug dealer makes money to a degree, but I think what ends up happening, and this is the hard part, is to discern if that person is really an addict. That's where drug court is having an issue.
I have an issue with that terminology, addict.
And it is?
Okay, for me, like, for somebody to say, like, hi, my name's Ken, I'm an addict.
Yeah.
You're labeling yourself something, and you're kind of like setting a destiny for yourself. If you say I am anything, just like the Moses Code, right, in the Bible, I am that I am. So, like, whatever you say after I am, you will become that or be that at a core level. And I think there's like a stigma around the term addict, or also like the term relapse, or like there's this verbiage around drug use that kind of demonizes it, and it, I think it perpetuates more drug use, is the language around it and the lifestyle around it. Because, like, somebody will lose self-confidence or self-esteem because they have this idea that they are an addict forever because they went through a couple years of heavy drinking or drug use.
Yeah, and if you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it directly tells you, or it says to you, that you can be recovered, and they use it as a permanence. So like if
I like that. I like that term, recovered.
So I've always said that I was on the journey to recovery, and now I am a recovered addict.
No, you won't catch me saying recovered addict. I'll say I'm recovered. Done.
The only reason why I say I'm a recovered addict is because it's a recognition to me, knowing that I don't have to go back to that. It's a choice for me. That's why I say I'm recovered. Now, even in saying that, I'm just going to bring up Portugal real quick here. So in Portugal, they had at one time a 48% heroin addiction, okay, in their populace. They decided to decriminalize all drugs. After 9 years, they have a 9% addiction rate in their country. That, yeah. So one of the things to look at between Canada's drug court and Portugal is, in Canada's drug court, once you fuck it up, that's it. There's no going back. They won't take you back in. You're fucked. In Portugal, you can keep going back and back and back, and there's no consequences. There is no consequences for not following through their program. And because there is no consequences, they're seeing a higher success rate. I think when we take a look at the 88%, while they say conservatively it's 78% of convicts are addicts, or they have a drug issue or an alcohol issue.
My lived experience, at least 95% of people are addicts in jail. That's a lived experience.
I agree. and I think to be diplomatic to the government, I'll accept 78. I'll accept that. But if it's 78%, then why is a judicial system trying to do what a healthcare system is supposed to do? That's my issue. At 78%, we are taking people with a healthcare issue and throwing them into a system that is not conducive towards abstinence or a segue to sobriety. Okay, it's not conducive at all. And the reason why is because there's just as many drugs rampant in there. I mean, I'm not going to put it on the guards, but I'm going to say this. If you were to stand in the shoes of a guard, what would you rather, sedate all of your convicts or allow them to run riot? Because the reality is it's 1 to 10. It's 10 inmates to one correctional staff. Correctional staff are going to look the other way when it comes to drugs time and time again. And the reason why is because their convicts are sedated then, and they're easy to handle. And if they're easy to handle, that's a good day at work. They don't have to worry then. When they have to worry is when there's no drugs in the building, because then people fall. People get hurt then. And they know this. They're not stupid. They may not be a part of bringing in drugs into that facility, but they're definitely reinforcing that it's better to have drugs in that facility than not have drugs in that facility. So it'd be like essentially sending an addict into detox and putting heroin in front of them. That's what we're doing, and this is where the gap in Canada needs to change. We have to change this. They could stop the fentanyl problem right now by decriminalizing heroin. If they decriminalized heroin right now, people would not be dying from fentanyl. The problem with fentanyl is the measurement is so minuscule in order to overdose that the people who are doing this in sheds, by making this dope, they're unable to see the granulate that's just over in the dosage, because they're not a pharmacologist. They're just average Joe drug dealer trying to do that. And so the government needs to start looking at what measures need to be taken in order to save the lives, as opposed to, in my opinion, this is an epidemic that this is a genocide that they're completely complicit in. They're okay with it. And I really believe that, because they know what the measures are. They've seen what Portugal did. I'm not saying Portugal is completely 100% effective, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we're doing. There are problems with what Portugal did, but they don't have 3 people dying every day anymore, and we do.
In the last year, I've had probably over 30 friends and associates die from fentanyl in 1 year. Mm-hmm. Like, I scroll through my Facebook friends list, and
Yeah.
like every 10th person is dead.
Yeah. Do you have a good suit? Do you have a nice suit?
To go to funerals?
Yeah.
I don't go to funerals.
Yeah.
I just don't go.
When I came into recovery, that's the first thing my sponsor told me. So you better get a good suit. And I said, why is that? And he said, because we're going to go to a lot of funerals. And I was blown away when he said that. What? We're in recovery. How could you die? I said, no, we're going to go to a lot of funerals. And unfortunately, he was right. You know, I've seen a lot of guys hang themselves, the whole bit. You know, that's the plethora of recovery, and that's what it is. And even, like I said, this whole entire correctional thing of restorative justice was basically just virtual signaling to say that Canada has changed its mandate in the direction that it's going. And Stephen Harper, when he brought out minimum mandatories, and I'm not throwing the Conservatives under the bus, all I'm saying is he's the one who brought minimum mandatories out. This changed the whole dynamic. Judges don't have the ability to give you house arrest if it's a minimum mandatory sentence. That's just what you're getting. And there's no two ways about it, you know?
I want to talk for a second about boot camp again.
Sure, yeah.
So I've seen guys come in weighing like 30 to 40 pounds underweight, probably like more, skin and bone, scabs on their face, been up for days. And within a few months of like, you know, self-development programs, working out, they put on some size, they get some self-respect back. Mm-hmm. And then they would leave again, like with a healthy state of mind. But because they were leaving back into society with no structured support systems or programming on the street, they had nowhere to go. They had no money. They have no family or support systems. Mm-hmm. They would be back in jail again within the matter of 3 months, skinny as fuck, junked out again. And we would say to them, like, what happened, man? Like, you left here so good. You had all these plans. What went wrong? And it, you know, it's the lack of structured reintegration. Mm-hmm. Like, where is the restorative justice if we just warehouse individuals with other addicts and a plethora of drugs, and we send them back out into nothing? Like, so the first step in restorative justice that I've ever seen was these boot camp units, and that's like an internal restorative justice in the system. You know, it's mm-hmm. like it's a program in the jail where guys can start working on like life skills and self-development and a healthy living style. But if we send them out into the street where there's not that continued, then it's a recipe for failure.
Well, and I think one of the things that we have to do with this podcast, especially this episode, is share the shit out of it. And the reason why I say that is because most people in Canada, especially in Canada, and I would even suggest in America, the constituents and the taxpayers need to start asking where the halfway houses are. Where are they? Because the reality is there's none.
There's none for provincial inmates.
I can tell you right. Well, even federally, there's some, but there's not enough for the need. And so the fact is this: everybody has this idea that not in my backyard, right? If I were to bring a halfway house into somebody's neighborhood, the neighborhood's going to get together and they're going to say, not in my backyard. Well, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. But when we go to do this, I would rather have massive apartment buildings where we're segueing people into individual living arrangements afterwards. But what I'm really getting at here is you ask anybody around you saying, is there a halfway house for people when they get out of jail? Oh yeah, for sure there is. And they won't think twice about it. I mean, John Howard Society is a great program and an awesome not-for-profit. But the double edge to that sword was everybody believes that John Howard Society has halfway houses everywhere here in Canada. The reality is the province stopped paying them. The federal government stopped paying them. And because they've stopped paying them, this isn't free. There's not enough donors in order to keep these programs going. So I would strongly encourage anybody who's out there, just normal Bob, go ask your MLA, how much money are we giving to restorative justice afterwards? And the other issue is probation officers are overworked. They do a damn good job. Most probation officers want to help those guys that they're with or women that they're with. They're not really against you. They have to be against you because their numbers are too high. That's a reality. And they're not afforded enough tools to actually give their client what their client needs. I mean, you're walking around in a world trying to fix everything. You're trying to walk around the world trying to fix everything with a screwdriver, and there's no other tools to do it. That's what these probation officers are doing. And it's very, very unfortunate that that's the world that they deal in. So people in the community have to get behind this. You want your bike to stop getting stolen, and you want to see the epidemic of addiction dissipate. I mean, addiction right now is in the place of cancer. I mean, there are more people dying from addiction than there is of people dying of cancer. And it's crazy. Like, it's just crazy that's a real number nowadays, you know? And so, like I said, we got to share this, and we got to get people listening. We got to get people listening to what even addicts are saying, because we are so disregarded. Addicts and people who've changed. There's such a small number of us, which would be Ken and I. There's such a small number of us that when we do speak, we're so disregarded. People disregard it because it's like, oh, you're an ex-convict, and you don't have enough behind you to say that this will work. Well, you got to start listening to us, because maybe our ideas are pretty valuable in this.
I'm gonna fight and die for this cause. Yeah. Like, I struggled through it. I've seen so many people die. I've seen families suffer. I've seen kids without dads. I've seen so much pain and suffering in the justice system and in like the criminal lifestyle. Like, I will fight and die the good fight now. And like, I'm involved in 3 different nonprofits. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm helping out in the community. I'm working on self-development programs. I'm going to school for social work right away. Like, I'm doing anything and everything I can in my power to get that credibility, mm-hmm. to be able to network and advocate for mm-hmm. programs and halfway houses. Like, I don't want to like piss the government off in any way, shape, or form, but like, we need this. Yeah. We need this as a society. Addiction affects everybody in society. Yeah. Like, I don't care who you are. You know somebody that's strung out on drugs. One of your mm-hmm. friends' kids are. And if you don't know anybody, you felt the effect of it. Your car has been stolen. Yeah. Your car has been broken into by an addict. Like, it happens.
Or you've given $20 to your addicted son or daughter.
Yeah, right? Like that guy that asks you for change every single day when you're walking into your office, like, he's an addict. It affects you. It affects every single person out there. There needs to be things in place for this. And
so, like, Ken, I think what we're going to do here, we're going to bring you back in. But when we bring you back in, I've got another executive director from a not-for-profit coming in. Yeah. I'd like to talk to you about the not-for-profits that you're involved in. So I would encourage you to go ask them to make sure that you can speak about them.
I already have. It's good to go.
And so we're going to sit down with another executive director, and I'd like to have you as well in on that podcast. And we'll talk about the PEAK program and things that organizations are doing and the opportunities that we have afforded. I think I'd like to give you that avenue. However, at this moment, we've ran out of time.
That went by so quick.
Yeah, it did, didn't it? So I thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm going to put the plug out there. We have a Patreon account that I would very greatly appreciate if you were to go to and donate $5 a week. That'd be fantastic. It would help out the mandate here and help out any of the not-for-profits that we end up giving donations to. And I would also ask you to visit us at Google Play, Stitches, iTunes, and Spotify, as well as the YouTube account, Justin Roberts Life on Life Terms, and Life on Life Terms on all the other guys. And I hope you enjoyed your time here, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.